No one knew her beauty until a bandit on the run spied the rancher's wife and lost his heart. Wyoming Territory, 1884. The moon hung low and red as if blood had spilled across the sky itself. Hooves thundered across the soaked earth, each beat sounding more desperate than the last. Rain had come hard, slashing sideways through the ridges and painting the world in silvered streaks, but Elijah Dust Kincaid didn't slow. He was bleeding bad. Left side, just under the ribs, where Mulgrew's bullet had carved a hot kiss through flesh and bone. The train job at Dry Gorge had gone wrong before the dynamite even blew, but betrayal, that came later, swift and gutting, with a smile from a man Dust once called brother. Now, alone and hunted, Dust tore through the hills like a dying storm, the landscape bleeding into darkness as his vision blurred. His horse, Crow, wheezed beneath him, each lunge forward more sluggish than the last. Somewhere past the cottonwoods, light shimmered through the haze. Not firelight, lamplight, a house or a barn. Shelter. Dust slid from the saddle, boots sinking into mud, and staggered forward. Trees leaned like sentries above him, branches wet and slick. His breath rattled with every step, pain clawing at his ribs. He stumbled through the brush, his hand pressed hard to the wound, vision narrowing like a closing door. Then he saw her. She stood near a well, shoulders cloaked in a thin shawl, rain dripping down strands of dark hair. A lantern hung from a crooked post, throwing golden light across her face. She was younger than he expected, yet something about her eyes seemed older than the earth itself. She moved like a ghost, quiet and fluid, and for a moment Dust wasn't sure if he'd crossed into death. She reached for the bucket and turned, and it wasn't the wound that made Dust fall to his knees. Her eyes met his, blue, clear, and sharp as shattered glass. The bucket slipped from her fingers and water splashed into the mud. In that instant, the distance between them disappeared. Time paused, just long enough for Dust to wonder if he'd ever known anything beautiful before this night. Then the world tilted, and he collapsed, face first in the wet earth. He came to with the scent of hay and leather in his nose. A barn, dimly lit, with rain drumming the roof like distant drums. He tried to move and cursed under his breath as fire tore through his side. A pair of boots stepped into view. "You're not dead," a voice said, low and even, "though you tried awful hard to be." He blinked upward. She stood over him, rifle in hand, but not aimed. Her dress clung to her legs from the rain, and a loose strand of hair curled against her cheek. "Bullet passed clean through," she said. "Bleeding stopped, mostly. You got lucky." Dust coughed, tasting copper. "You a doctor?" "No," she said. "Just a woman who knows how to clean up messes." He studied her, eyes catching on the raw steadiness in her face. She looked tired, but not weak. Lonely, but not broken. "You got a name," he rasped. "Clara." "Clara." He let the word settle on his tongue like a prayer. "You live here alone?" Her eyes narrowed. "You ask a lot of questions for a man who's half dead in my barn." He smiled weakly. "I could stop talking, but then you'd miss out on all my charm." Clara didn't smile. She knelt beside him, checking the makeshift bandage she'd tied around his ribs. "You're either lost," she said quietly, her breath warm on his skin, "or hunted. Which is it, stranger?" He met her eyes. They were closer now. He could see the freckles hidden beneath the dirt on her cheeks, could smell wood smoke in her hair. "And still," he lied. "Just got caught in the rain." She stared at him a long moment, then stood. "You'll stay in the barn tonight. First light, you ride on." His body screamed in protest. "Not sure I'll make it that far." "Then that's your problem." She turned and walked into the shadows. Dust lay back against the straw, staring up at the wooden beams above. Outside, thunder cracked like a rifle shot. Inside, silence pressed in thick. But her eyes stayed with him, and for the first time in years, sleep found him. By morning, the pain had dulled, replaced with a throb that let him think clearly. He sat up slow, clutching his ribs, and looked around. The barn was clean, tools hung neatly, saddles oiled and stacked. Whoever this Clara was, she ran the place like a soldier. Sunlight bled through a crack in the wall, illuminating a carving on one of the support beams. A small flower, etched with careful fingers. Beneath it, initials. C.R. He stood, swaying, and made his way toward the house. Smoke curled from the chimney. Chickens pecked at the mud near the porch. A rocking chair sat still beside the door, and hanging from the eave, A wind chime whispered in the breeze. She opened the door before he could knock. "You shouldn't be walking." "I heal fast." "Not fast enough," she said, eyeing the blood on his shirt. "You eat yet?" He shook his head. She stepped aside. Inside, the air smelled of bread and soap. The kitchen was modest. Worn wood, iron stove, a single cracked window letting in pale light. She handed him a tin cup of coffee. It burned his throat and woke something deep in his bones. "You got a husband?" he asked. She didn't look up. "He left 6 weeks ago. Went to Riverton to sell cattle. Ain't come back yet." "You worried?" "No." Dust waited, but she offered nothing more. "You don't strike me as someone easy to fool." "I'm not." Silence stretched between them. Then Clara leaned on the counter and said, without blinking, "That's a lawman's bullet in your side. You ran from a badge." Dust froze. "You may lie with your mouth, stranger," she added, "but your wound tells the truth." He set down the cup. "You gonna turn me in?" "If I wanted you dead, I'd have let you bleed out in the dirt." He smiled again, slower this time. "Why didn't you?" Her eyes softened, just slightly. "Because you look like a man who forgot what kindness feels like." The words hit harder than a bullet. Outside, a horse whinnied. Dust turned to the window. A lone rider moved across the ridge, slow and watching. The shape was distant, but familiar. Clara saw it too. Her hand moved to the rifle leaning near the door. "That's not someone you want seeing you here," she whispered. Dust's jaw clenched. The pain in his side returned like fire. "How far to the root cellar?" She stared at him, then nodded once. They moved quickly. As she lifted the trapdoor beneath the pantry, Dust looked back. The wind had picked up. The rider was closer now. He wore a black hat, and even at a distance, Dust knew that silhouette. Mulgrew had come hunting. Clara's voice cut through the moment, low and steady. "Get down there. I'll handle the door." Dust descended into darkness, but as the trap shut above him, one thought echoed in his mind like hoofbeats on dry rock. He'd come here to disappear. But now, he was staying to protect the only soul who ever saw him. Morning light cut through the broken slats of the barn, laying gold across the hay. Dust woke to the sound of a rifle being cocked. He didn't move, didn't even blink, just let his eyes drift open slowly, as though he were greeting the dawn, not death. Clara Rowan stood above him, rifle balanced in her arms, finger resting near the trigger but not squeezing. Her dress was wrinkled from sleep, her hair braided loose, and her gaze steady as stone. "You've lived through the night," she said, voice low but firm. "But I ain't decided if that's good or bad." Dust grinned through the ache in his ribs. "Your hospitality's the finest I've known." "I didn't do it for you," she replied. She tilted the barrel of the rifle toward his bandaged side. "That bullet wound set enough. You bleed like a man chased by more than the weather." He shifted, sitting up slowly against the haystack. The bandage was clean, the wound tight, patched with steady hands. He could still feel her touch in the careful knot, though the rifle in her hands told him tenderness and trust were not the same thing. "You got a name?" she asked. He considered lying, but his lips formed the truth in fragments. "Dust." Her brows flicked up. "Not a name. A shadow. Maybe that's all I've been." She didn't soften. She didn't move. Her finger brushed the wood of the rifle like it was part of her body. "That's a lawman's bullet. You ran from a badge." The grin fell from his mouth. Silence swallowed the barn, broken only by the shuffle of horses outside. "I've seen enough holes and enough men," she added. "I know the kind a sheriff's gun makes." Dust stared at her, not sure if it was admiration or fury boiling inside him. "You ever think maybe I ain't running from the law, but toward something I lost?" Her eyes narrowed, weighing him like grain in a sack. She said nothing, and that silence was louder than any curse. Hours passed, measured by the work of her hands. Dust tried to stand, and she shoved him back down with one hand on his chest. "You move, you tear it open. I ain't patching it twice." She went about her chores, feeding chickens, leading the cow to the pasture, chopping kindling with arms that carried more strength than her frame suggested. She worked without complaint, but there was a tightness in her every motion, a weariness she tried to hide. Dust watched. He saw the way she checked the horizon more often than the animals. He saw how her fingers lingered on the rifle when she passed it by. When she finally came back to him, sweat shining on her brow, he said softly, "You got a storm in your eyes. Mrs. Rowan. Her mouth curved, not into a smile but something sharper. Then don't blink, outlaw, or you'll drown in it. For the first time since Dry Gorge, he laughed, though it turned into a cough that made his ribs scream. Clara looked at him with a flash of something, concern, maybe, though she masked it quick. You laugh easy for a man hunted. And you hold a gun easy for a woman alone. Her jaw tightened. I'm not alone. My husband'll be back. From where? She turned away, set the rifle down with more force than needed. Cattle deal. Riverton. He's late, but he'll come. Dust didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between them told him she doubted it as much as he did. By evening, shadows grew long across the hills. Clara cooked beans and bread, serving him a portion smaller than her own. He ate slow, savoring each bite, not because it was rich but because it was human. You hear things out here, Dust said between bites, about a woman who lives alone on Coldwater Ranch. Some say she's strange, cursed, cold. Her eyes lifted, dark and unflinching. And what do you say? He leaned forward, wincing from the wound. I say they're blind. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. She looked away, busied herself with the dishes, though her hands trembled for the first time all day. Night settled deep. Dust lay back in the hay, staring at the stars through the cracks in the roof. Clara sat near the door, rifle across her lap, rocking slowly in silence. He thought she might be guarding against him, or maybe the world outside. The air was heavy with things unsaid. Finally, he broke it. Why'd you help me? She didn't look up. Because when I found you, you were on your knees. Not from the wound, but from something heavier. And I know what that feels like. The words sat between them, aching. Dust closed his eyes, hearing the rain return. For a moment, he thought he could rest here, in this strange place, in the presence of a woman who hadn't flinched once. Then he heard it. Hooves. Slow, deliberate, crunching in the distance. Clara stood before he did, rifle raised, face pale in the lantern light. She stared past the barn doors, toward the dark ridgeline. A single rider appeared against the sky, black hat pulled low, horse moving steady. Clara's grip tightened, her body stiffening. That's not someone you want seeing you here, she whispered. Dust followed her gaze, and the fire in his blood flared. The Mulgrews had found him. The night grew colder, and the silence heavier than thunder. The rider on the ridge didn't linger. He turned his horse and vanished into the folds of the hills, but Clara didn't lower the rifle until the last echo of hooves was gone. Dust saw the tension in her shoulders, the kind that never truly eased. She knew trouble when she saw it, and she knew it was only the beginning. By nightfall, the trouble arrived. It started with faint sounds, hooves in the distance, men's voices carried thin on the wind. Dust sat up on the cot she dragged into the barn for him, his breath sharp in the cold air. Clara appeared in the doorway, lantern in hand, her face pale in its glow. They're coming, she whispered. Not one rider. A pack. His jaw tightened. Mulgrew brothers. Her brow furrowed at the name. They're hunting me, he said. They won't quit till they find me. She didn't waste words. She blew out the lantern and grabbed his arm, half pulling him across the barn. Pain flared in his side, but she moved him with surprising strength to the house. Inside, she flung open a trapdoor in the pantry floor. The root cellar, she hissed. Get down there. He caught her wrist. You don't know what you're. Now, she cut him off. Her eyes burned hotter than the fever in his wound, and he obeyed. He climbed into the darkness, landing hard against the dirt. She pulled the door closed, leaving him in the black with only the scent of earth and potatoes. Through the cracks, faint slivers of light bled down. He heard her boots above, quick and precise, then silence. Dust pressed his ear to the wood. Hooves grew louder. Laughter, cruel and sharp, cut through the night. Then voices. Coldwater Ranch. Reckon he came this way. Lady Rowan keeps to herself. She won't give him up. She'll burn with him, then. Dust closed his eyes. The cellar pressed in tighter. He could picture their faces, Mulgrew's sneer, the scar cutting across his cheek, the hunger in his eyes. They wanted what he carried, and they'd kill for it. The trapdoor creaked. Clara opened it, her face a pale oval above him. She thrust a canteen into his hands. You brought death here, she said. I didn't mean. Don't talk. Answer me plain. What did you steal? And why'd they send hell after you for it? Her voice was sharper than the rifle she carried. Dust reached into his coat, pulling out a brass locket on a chain. He placed it in her hand. She flipped it open. Inside, etched into the metal, was a map, fine and deliberate. But it wasn't the map that made her freeze. It was the name scratched into the back. Rowan. Her hand trembled. Where did you get this? It was on a girl, he said softly. Young. Barely grown. Mulgrews killed her when she wouldn't give it up. I took it from them before they could bury it. Thought maybe I could use it. Thought maybe I could make them pay. Clara's throat worked as she swallowed. Her eyes glistened in the dim light. I knew her, she whispered. My sister's child. She stayed here one summer. She carved her name into my fence post, like she wanted to stake claim in this world. I never saw her again. Dust's chest tightened. I'm sorry. She shook her head, closing the locket with a sharp snap. Her eyes found his, colder now, harder than stone. You brought their war here. I thought I was the storm, he said, voice rough, until I met the woman who never looked away from lightning. Her breath caught. She turned her face, but he saw the flicker there, the crack in her armor. You don't just carry scars, Clara, he added. You wear 'em like armor. But armor gets heavy. She clenched her jaw, fighting something inside. Finally, she whispered, why didn't you leave it? Why didn't you ride the other way? He leaned against the dirt wall, pain and memory mixing in his eyes. Maybe I came here to die. But you made me remember why I once chose to live. For a moment, silence. Only the muffled voices outside, laughter circling like vultures. Then came the first explosion. A glass bottle shattered against the barn outside. Flames erupted, licking high, crackling through the night. Smoke poured through the cracks in the cellar ceiling. Clara's head snapped up, her face a mask of horror. Voices roared from the yard. We know he's here, Clara. Give us the outlaw, or we burn everything. The fire spread, casting orange glow through the boards, shadows dancing like devils. Clara tightened her grip on the rifle. Her face was pale, but her eyes blazed. Dust struggled to stand, pain tearing through him. They'll kill you, he rasped. She met his gaze. Then let's make them earn it. Another bottle smashed. More fire. The night howled with rage and smoke. And Clara Rowan, the woman the town called cursed, squared her shoulders against it all, standing taller than the flames. The world outside turned red. The trapdoor slammed shut. And the only thing louder than the fire was the promise of violence still to come. Flames clawed at the barn walls, sparks showering the night like molten rain. Clara flung open the trapdoor, smoke curling down into the cellar. Dust coughed, dragging himself up with one hand pressed to his side. Her other hand grabbed him, pulling him into the burning air, rifle slung tight against her shoulder. Move, she barked, and he did. They burst from the house as another bottle shattered against the porch, fire racing across the wood. The Mulgrew brothers hooped and hollered from the dark, torches in their fists, revolvers gleaming in the firelight. Dust ducked behind the stone well, drawing his Colt with trembling fingers. Clara crouched beside him, rifle raised, eyes narrowed. A shot cracked, whistling past her ear, splintering the fence post behind them. She didn't flinch. Her return fire dropped a shadowed figure in the dust. You shoot like a lawman, Dust muttered, teeth clenched against the pane. I shoot like a woman who's tired of being left alive for men's convenience, she answered, reloading without looking at him. Voices closed in. Boots pounded. A lantern shattered against the corral, and the smell of burning hay filled the air. Dust fired blind into the smoke, hearing one man scream, another curse. Clara's bullets were deliberate, each crack measured, each shot purposeful. She wasn't spraying lead. She was harvesting lives. They pressed close together behind the well, smoke thickening. Dust could feel her shoulder against his, steady and unyielding. Something rose in his chest, something more searing than the fire. If I die tonight, he rasped, let it be standing beside the only woman who didn't run from my shadow. She glanced at him, her breath misting in the night. Her eyes, bright with flame and defiance, caught his and held. You ain't a ghost, Dust. You're just the only man who ever saw me. A lump formed in his throat. He swallowed hard, nodded once. Then let's make sure they remember we were both real. They broke cover as the barn collapsed, embers scattering like stars. Clara dropped 2 more men before they could light their torches. Dust fired until his gun clicked empty, then swung it like a club into a bandit's jaw. He stumbled, nearly fell, but Clara's hand caught him, steadied him, pulled him back into the fight. Mulgrew himself emerged from the smoke, tall and broad, scar twisted across his face like a brand from hell. His revolver gleamed in one hand, a torch in the other. His grin was wolfish. "You've got guts, Rowan," he shouted at Clara. "But guts don't stop fire." He hurled the torch onto the porch roof. The house roared to life, flames climbing into the night sky. Clara lifted her rifle, but another man tackled her from aside. Dust surged forward, ignoring the scream of his ribs, slamming his fist into the bandit's temple. He yanked Clara free, and together they rolled behind the charred remains of the corral. Bullets sang through the night. Clara reloaded with hands that didn't shake, even as fire painted her face orange. Dust pressed his shoulder against hers again, shielding her as she aimed. He finally spoke the words he'd hidden since she dragged him from the mud. "I wasn't running from justice," he gasped. "I was set up. For murder." Her eyes flicked toward him, searching, questioning. "The Mulgrews," he said. "They framed me for a killing they did. Sheriff bought their story. And that locket," he pulled it from his pocket, shoved it into her palm. "It's proof of the land they stole. Signed by your husband." The words cut deeper than the bullets flying overhead. Clara froze, eyes wide, staring at the brass in her hand. "My husband." "They used him," Dust said. "Or he sold you out. Either way, his name's there." She looked at the locket as if it were a rattlesnake in her hand. Then she snapped it shut, raised her rifle, and fired into the night, her face carved from steel. The Mulgrews, seeing the fight turn, pulled back. One by one their shadows vanished into the hills, carrying their wounded, leaving only the fire behind. The ranch groaned and collapsed into itself, sparks whirling skyward. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with smoke and grief. Clara lowered her rifle. Her chest heaved, her face streaked with soot, her hair tangled wild. Dust leaned against the well, half-conscious, revolver limp at his side. They had survived, but survival felt hollow against the ruin before them. Clara staggered forward, kicking through ashes and embers. Her eyes scanned the ground, the debris, until she froze. At her feet lay a leather saddlebag, half buried in dirt. She bent slowly, hands trembling, and lifted it. The brand on the leather was unmistakable. Her husband's mark. Her face went pale, the color draining as if the fire itself had stolen it. She clutched the saddlebag to her chest, staring into the flames as though they were suddenly speaking truths she had long refused to hear. Dust watched her, his heart sinking. And in the silence, only the crackle of burning wood remained. The smoke curled higher, black against the stars, and the night closed in with a truth too heavy to name.